so we are now, this is going to be our last dot point from the study design, but we still need to come back and obviously do brain structures next. But Elizabeth Loftus essentially is dot point number 12. 12? Yes. So she looks at the fallibility of memory. So that's the idea that memory fails us, okay? So she's also linked very closely with reconstruction, which is from dot point 11. So we looked at measures of retention, so recall, recognition, relearning, reconstruction. Remembering that reconstruction is out of relative sensitivity, okay? It's not a sensitive measure of retention. It's just a part of retention. So in the way that we retain memory, we now know that we reconstruct it every time. And at times that means we can implant falsehoods into our memories. Or implant, we fill gaps and we fill holes, and we fill that with plausible information, okay? We like to have a coherent and a full memory. So each time we recall it, if there's a part of it that's missing, we'll reconstruct and add that part in with a completely plausible element. Okay, so it's not like we're intentionally trying to lie or intentionally trying to create false memories. That's just subconsciously and unconsciously what the brain does so that we do have a clear and coherent memory. Okay, and then each time we recall it, if we recall that incorrect element of it, it gets solidified and consolidated and becomes a really strong part of that memory, even though it actually wasn't true to begin with. Okay, so Loftus is kind of like, I guess she's one of the greatest experimenters in this area, okay? So she essentially found that our memories can be reconstructed based simply on the way people question us about our experiences. Okay? And what she called those questions were leading questions. So a leading question is anything that assumes a piece of knowledge or is suggesting or leading to a desired response. All right? So leading questions are more often used, this was very much looked at around eyewitness testimony and why eyewitness testimony in the justice system is something that we really can't hold in high regard. Okay? That's what sparked her interest in this area. Because obviously the way eyewitness testimonies come about is through police interrogation or police questioning. So if the police are continuously using leading questions, they can essentially create a witness that is delivering a version of their story that suits the suspect that they've got in custody, and that person fully believes that memory is their own, when actually it's been reconstructed based on the leading questions. All right, so a leading question, as I said, assumes that piece of knowledge or leads us to a desired response. So by asking someone how fast was the car going when it ran the stop sign, that person's then going to assume that there was a stop sign involved because that person ran it. They didn't stop at the stop sign. Or, what was the man wearing when they robbed you? The assumed knowledge is that the gender of the criminal was a man. All right. So this piece of assumed knowledge is what we call the presupposition. So the presupposition is that assumed knowledge. So ran the stop sign is the presupposition. The man is the presupposition. Okay? It has to be true to make that question make sense. All right? And so essentially, the presupposition itself is what leads us to the reconstruction, is essentially what Loftus concluded. So she did a number of studies with her... I'll rub that off. With her research assistant, Palmer. So the first study they did, they had 45 participants and they had 5 conditions. Okay, so they had 5 independent groups. So the experimental design they used was independent groups. Each group functioned as its own. There's 45. They were randomly allocated into one of the 5 groups. That was the group they stayed in. So the group was shown a 1-minute video that included a 4-second car crash. And they were then asked a series of questions about that car crash that they had watched. However, the leading question that they were asked was how fast were the cars going when they somethinged into each other? And each condition had a different question. So the words then were, or the presuppositions that were included in this question were ranked from most intense to least intense. Okay? So the most intense word they used was smashed. So condition 1, the participants were asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. Then for condition 5, which had the least intense word, they were asked, well, how fast were the cars going when they contacted into each other? Okay, and so that essentially, that word was the presupposition. So the 5 words they chose were smashed, collided, bumped, hit, contacted. And that is their order that they had ranked them in from most intense to least intense presupposition. Okay. They then looked at, they were asked then to estimate or predict how fast the cars were going in the video that they'd watched. all right? And these are the reported speeds here. Now, they're in miles per hour because Loftus did, she was an American researcher. So essentially, the highest reported estimated speed came from condition 1, who were asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. So the average speed they recorded was 40 miles per hour. Now, we're not necessarily looking for really massive differences in between these groups. What we're looking at is what was the difference between our most intense words and our least intense words. And you can see that there's a pretty significant difference, okay? So for condition 5, the group that were asked how fast were the cars going when they bumped in, or when they contacted each other, 31.8 miles. So there's virtually a difference of roughly 9 miles per hour there. Okay, so that's a pretty big difference considering they all watched exactly the same video. So essentially what they concluded was that the wording of the question did have a statistically significant effect on the reported estimated speed. All right. Now, when we say it's statistically significant, it means that those results are due purely to the independent variable and not due to chance. Okay. So if something is statistically significant, we can generalize and we can apply that to the broader population. All right. Now, we then, though, have to think about, well, were there any potential extraneous or confounding variables? Remembering, a confounding variable is anything that absolutely will impact the study. An extraneous variable is something that possibly could. All right. So in this instance, we had experimenter bias and response bias as two things that we looked into, or that Loftus looked into. All right. So experimenter bias is when the experimenter themselves in some way behaves consciously or unconsciously in a way that leads the participants to give a desired response. Okay, so they may have placed more infliction or more emphasis on the presupposition in the more intense conditions and less emphasis in the less intense conditions. However, that's something that we usually account for. So you would have the same experimenter deliver the question for everybody. The other thing that they thought maybe equated for some of the difference in the results was response bias, which is where we give a response that we think the experimenter wants from us. Okay, but these were essentially both kind of ruled out because they did have measures to account for experimenter bias. And response bias, the presupposition doesn't necessarily give any clues away in terms of what the experimenter is wanting from them. Because remembering as well, this wasn't the only question they were asked. This was one question in a series of questions. Okay, so in that sense, we can look at these results and go, okay, no, the way that we're asked about something or the leading questions that we're asked can influence our responses and influence how we perceive or remember something that we've witnessed. Remembering that memory is just a copy of what we've seen. It's not, we're not storing the exact experience. The memory in itself is a copy, okay? So what they then did is they did a second study. Now, in the second study, they had 150 participants with 3 conditions. Again, independent groups was used, all right? So they randomly allocated the 150 participants into 3 groups of 50. Now, in condition 1, they were asked again to view a 1-minute video with a 4-second multiple car crash. And they were asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. Again, not the only question. It was asked in a series of questions. Condition 2 were asked how fast were the cars going when they hit each other, so our second least intense presupposition. And the third condition was our control group. So they were asked no questions about the speed of the cars whatsoever. So after the initial questioning, participants were brought in 2 weeks later and then again asked a series of questions, not all leading questions, but a series of questions. But the leading question that was of interest to the experimenters or to Loftus was, did you see the broken glass? Now, it's important to understand why this is a leading question. It's a leading question because it is phrased in a way that it assumes the broken glass was there. So if you didn't see it, that was your error. All right? Remembering, we can't pay attention to every single detail when we're taking something in. There was no broken glass present in this video. But the way that the question is phrased subconsciously makes us believe that broken glass was present, but I just obviously didn't see it. It was there, but I didn't see it. Okay? We weren't asked, was there broken glass? The participants were asked, did you see the broken glass? Okay? So that in itself supposes or assumes that the glass existed and is asking whether we actually saw it or not. Did we take notice of it? It was there, did we take notice of it? However, in reality, there was no glass present in that video. Okay? So then again, we're looking at our results. All right, so these are the participants that answered yes, I did see the broken glass. And these are the participants that answered no. Right, so you can see that we did have overwhelming numbers answer no, all right? But we had 16 people in condition 1 who were asked the most intense presupposition question about speed. 16 of them said, yes, I saw the broken glass. If we compare that to the control group, only 6 people did, okay? Remembering again, those 6 people in the control group aren't lying, okay? Or maybe that's where there is some response bias coming in. They've asked me, did I see the broken glass? I didn't, that must be my fault, I should just say yes. Okay, so we can account for that, but that is also a result of the leading question, all right? And a really interesting addition that could have been done to this study would actually be to have another time lapse, so whether that's another 2 weeks, bring the participants back again and ask them to recount or write down as much as they can remember from that car accident, and to then see how many people reported broken glass. Because, like I said, whilst they might have been honest in here to say, oh no, I didn't see it, it doesn't mean that their memory hasn't still now been reconstructed to believe that the glass existed, and the next time they recall the memory of the video to actually mention the broken glass. Okay? And it's not because they go, oh, I didn't see it, but it was there. It's because they start to genuinely believe it was there, and they can genuinely start to believe that they saw it. Because that is how fallible memory is. That's how easily manipulated it is. And that's essentially what Loftus kind of discovered. This idea that it fails us and we reconstruct it so that we feel more safe in our memories that they're our own. So that's why her research essentially revolutionized how the justice system worked, because it showed us that we actually can't trust what we see. We can't trust our memory well enough to know that we're recounting or recalling things completely accurately. Because the simple notion of the change of a word, so smashed, collided, bumped, hit, contacted, or the way a question is phrased, did you see this, can implant a falsehood into our memory.